Ron Wisman, who had been married for 10 years, was keen to head home to Amy. She was not only a great catch, but she was also a fantastic cook. Amy was a well-groomed woman, but she was also an excellent chef and the ideal partner for a man. She mentioned the previous day that she wanted to have dinner at her place with Mike Armstrong, her new boss. She said he wanted to get to know her husband and get a feel for her family. Ron didn't see anything wrong with that and said he would like to meet her new boss, especially. The last two people in this role didn't last long and left under somewhat mysterious circumstances. The most recent person in the role quit after only a few months, saying they needed to take an extended sabbatical in Sri Lanka to find themselves. The person who worked before them was found decapitated in their garage with their hands tied behind their back. The police said that surgically removed genitals were never located. Upon noticing the time, Ron sent his wife a text message to let her know he was away and then locked his office. She responded right away saying, "I'll see you soon. I cherish you, Ron. Goodbye." He bade farewell to his secretary and made his way home, making a brief stop to purchase a bouquet of roses. For his wife, he liked doing things like that to surprise her, and she liked receiving gifts from him. She also liked to thank him for the little gifts. Ron turned down the driveway to his house and noticed the black Mercedes at the curb in front of his house. At least this man had the sense to stay out of my driveway. Ron went inside and Ron noticed a man of about 45 sitting on the couch. He was quite tall and seemed well built with a slight gray on his temples. He was clean-shaven and his face seemed to have one of those perpetual smirks playing on it. The man stood up with a smile on his face as Ron entered the room and held out his hand. Ron shook it before apologizing. He went to the kitchen and gave Amy the flowers before giving her a hug. She looked really happy to get them. "I'll have to thank you properly for this later," he said. He kissed her on the cheek and then gave her a little slap on the bum. "Now be a good host and go say hello to Mike," she said. He gave her another kiss and went back into the living room. He walked over to his drink bar and offered Mike a shot of whiskey, which he accepted. Ron poured Mike a shot of whiskey, which Mike accepted. The two men sat down in the living room after Ron had poured the liquor. "What a wife you have," Mike said, and his smile became even more noticeable. "I have to agree," Ron said. "She's the meaning of my life." "Then I think you'll understand why I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do," Mike said. "What is it?" "I'm going to sleep with your wife," said Mike. "She's going to love it, and you're going to watch." "Just hold that thought for a second." Ron made his way to the kitchen. "I'm going to show Mike around the neighborhood a little. We'll be right back." Amy gave him an understanding look. "Don't be long, dear. Dinner will be ready in about 15 or 20 minutes past." "Great," Ron said. "I'll be right back." He went back to the front room. "I hope you didn't tell your wife what I said," Mike said. Ron shook his head. "No." "Let's go into my cave," Ron said. He gestured for Mike to follow him. Mike got up and followed Ron into his office, also known as his personal man cave. Mike looked around at what was hung on the walls in addition to the pictures. There were pictures on the wall too. Official commendations, medals, knives, guns, and a few swords. Ron asked, "You're going to sleep with my wife, aren't you?" Mike nodded and said, "Yeah, I'm going to." Ron replied, "Do you have a problem with that?" Mike replied, "No, why would I?" Ron said, "My wife told me you were an accountant doing research for some special task force," he said. "Yes," Ron said, "it's true that I'm a CPA, and yes, I do work for a joint federal and private task force. But I wasn't always an accountant." Mike said. Ron pointed to items on the wall. "You know, I was in the Army once. I was a scout sniper at the time." Ron said most of my 150 confirmed sniper kills were from 300 to 600 millions away, but I've successfully. He'd hit targets as far away as 1,200 millions, which is over a kilometer. At that distance, you never hear a shot. 1 second you're alive and breathing, the next you're dead. He pulled out a desk drawer and ran his hands over his knife collection. Mike wasn't very comfortable by this time, and it got worse when Ron pulled out one very large knife. "I'm also perfectly fine with close range. Range kills," he said, holding the sharp blade where Mike could see it. "There's nothing like seeing your enemy up close and personal." Mike's face turned white and the smirk disappeared. "Look, Ron, there's nothing personal about this." "Oh, but it is," Mike said. "You just told me you were going to sleep with my wife, and you expect me to watch." That makes it very personal to me. I just want you to know what you're risking. You see, I believe in the old. I'm sure you understand the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. He looked at his watch. Oh, I think dinner's about ready. We'd better get back. Mike nodded his head and watched in horror as Ron threw a knife at a thick target on the far wall. The knife hit exactly in the center before plunging halfway through. I like practicing, Ron said to Amy's ash-pale boss. They headed into the dining room where Amy set a table for 3, placing the bouquet on the table. She'd brought home, as always, and she seated Ron at the head of the table, Mike to his left and herself to his right. They sat down and Ron took Amy's hand. He held out his hand to Mike. We like to say a prayer before we eat, he said. Mike gently took Ron's hand. Amy and Ron bowed their heads and closed their eyes. Mike followed suit, not knowing what to expect. Lord, Ron said, thank you for this food we are about to eat. Thank you for your many blessings for our home and our. May you continue to bless us with your wisdom and grace. Amen. I hope everyone enjoys this, Amy said, as she opened the plates to reveal a succulent Cornish hen, one of Ron's favorite dishes. I started cooking it over low heat this morning. It's delicious, honey, Ron said, taking a big bite. Don't you agree, Mike? Mike nodded nervously in agreement. Yes, it's delicious. You're a wonderful cook, Amy. Ron noticed that Mike was looking at him nervously as he complimented Amy on, Don't worry, Mike. I never kill anyone at the dinner table, do I? Darling, Mike's face went pale as Amy nodded approvingly. Not without good reason, she added. It can get quite messy, and I really don't like having to clean blood off the tablecloth. She went on, After all, it's over 100 years old. Honey, Ron said, Mike told me that he plans to sleep with you and he wants me to watch. Did you know anything about that? No, Amy said. He never said anything. To me, she looked at Mike. Is it true, Mike? Are you planning to sleep with me? Please, Amy. I didn't say that. Maybe your husband misunderstood me, Mike said, shaking his head. Ron pulled out a tiny digital record and pressed a button. I'm going to sleep with your pretty wife, Mike's voice said. She's going to love it, and you're going to watch. Mike's face turned red as Amy shook her head. What's the matter with you? Amy asked. We welcome you into our home. We feed you. We offer you hospitality, and this is how you repay us, Mike said. It was just a joke. I was just kidding. Well, that's it, honey, Ron said. He was only joking. She said, What's the punchline? I'm not laughing. Look, that's not what I meant, Mike said, raising his hands. Is that what you said to the husband of the last wife you slept with? Ron asked. I told you I'm a researcher. I checked you out when Amy told me about you, Ron said. My research shows that you were fired from Acme Enterprises 3 months ago after being named as the defendant in a civil suit for alienation of affection. The man who filed that suit was the husband of the woman you divorced after he caught you both naked in a hotel room. Mike lowered his gaze to his plate. Amy asked, Is it true? Mike replied quietly, I've done some things I'm not proud of, but that's all in the past. Ron added, I also learned that Mike's ex-wife was so tired of his cheating that she turned to a group called the Marriage Mutual Insurance Society, or MMAs. Mike's wife was so tired of his cheating that she turned to a group called the Marriage Mutual Insurance Society, or MMAs. Is that right, Mike? Yes, it's true, he said. I even saw the videotape of the punishment she was going to give him. Ron told Amy it was pretty brutal. I would have thought it would make you change your habits, but that didn't happen, did it, Mike? Mike looked at him, shocked. How do you know about that? Ron said, shaking his head. I told you I'm a researcher. I have access to information you wouldn't believe. My task force actually interceded on your wife's behalf. Don't you remember? After we contacted his wife, she agreed to give him a choice. Either he would accept the punishment and stay in the marriage, or he would agree to a fair divorce settlement. I guess he didn't want to be humiliated, so he agreed to the divorce. Ron looked back at Mike and said, You know, you really dodged a bullet with that one. What kind of punishment was she going to give him? She would have tied him up and severely beaten him, said Ron. She would have forced him to watch his wife sleep with several men. It would have been a very unpleasant picture. Oh, said Amy. Branded? Yeah, said Ron. Right on his ass. Slowly, Mike wrinkled his nose at the memory. Your group saved his ass. Amy asked. Ron nodded. Unfortunately, obviously, he hasn't learned his lesson. Ron said, "Maybe we should teach him that lesson." "Amy, tonight," Ron nodded his head. "Maybe you're onto something, honey." He said. He looked at Mike, who was shaking his head furiously. "Please don't do this," he pleaded, shifting his gaze from Ron to Amy. "Why not?" Ron asked. "You didn't get the message before. Maybe we should teach you that it's not nice to sleep with other people's wives." He paused and then added, "I still have your ex. We could invite her over to teach you a lesson. I have a lot of things I could use to cause you a lot of pain." Ron looked at Amy. "I still have that knife-throwing board in the basement. As close as possible without hitting her. I think it was called the Wheel of Death. We could strip Mike naked, tie him spread eagle to the board, and see how close we can get to his balls without cutting them off." He said. He looked at Mike and asked, "Wouldn't that be fun? You know, Amy's pretty good at throwing knives too, but not as good as me." "Isn't that the board that spins?" Amy asked. Ron nodded his head and said, "Oh yeah, that would be fun. We could place bets to see who gets closest." She looked at him and said, "I think we should do it." At Mike. "Oh, come on, Mike, that would be awesome. What do I have to do to make it stop?" "That's easy," said Ron. "From now on, you'll forget any thought of having my wife or any other wife. You'll be the epitome of professionalism. There will be no late nights, and certainly no business trips out of town with Amy if I'm not there. You'll treat every woman with respect. That's it." "I understand," said Mike. Ron nodded. "Just know that I'll be watching. If you screw up, you'll pay the price. You should have paid the price a long time ago." Mike nodded his head in understanding. "Is there anything you want to tell us?" Mike nodded his head again. "I'm sorry. I really am. I will never do anything like that to anyone else." At his wife, he asked, "So what are we having for dessert?" "I made a really good cheesecake," she said. "Would you boys like a piece?" Ron looked at Mike, who was shaking with terror. "Well, how about some dessert?" he asked. Mike shook his head. No thanks." Ron noticed that Amy was looking at Mike's pants. He lowered his gaze and saw the wet spot on Mike's crotch. He shook his head. "Yeah, I can see why you needed to go home." Mike suddenly realized that he could smell something unpleasant coming from his pants. "Come on, get out of here and remember what I said." "I will," he said, heading for the front door. As he walked towards the exit, both of them noticed a wet spot on the back of his pants. "Can you believe he actually his pants?" Ron asked. "Yeah, disgusting," Amy replied. "Maybe I should bring him a box of candy tomorrow," Ron said, laughing. He looked at his attractive wife as he heard the tires. "Screech, is there any chance this cheesecake will last until tomorrow?" Ron asked. Amy gave a head nod. "Indeed," she replied. "Let's tidy up this mess before moving on to the upstairs dessert. What's your opinion about AP?" Thanks for joining us in our stories where revenge is served hot. Please consider subscribing to our channel to ensure your next chef remains loyal. Tune in for the next one to get your revenge appetite fulfilled. If you're below 18, hold on, it's not for the faint-hearted.